I have played in the band for the great royal occasions for 11 years, and I can tell you that up close they are not gentle things at all. The drums go straight through your chest. The crowds roar like the sea. The guns, when they fire, shake the very ground beneath your boots. It is magnificent, and it is enormous, and it is a great deal for anyone to stand in the middle of. For a grown adult it can be overwhelming. And on that particular day, standing not far from the family, I found myself watching not the ceremony at all, but a small boy, and the father beside him, because in the middle of all that thunder, something very quiet and very human was happening that I have never once forgotten. The small boy was Prince Louis, and the father was Prince William. It was one of the grandest occasions of the year, the kind that fills the sky with noise and the streets with hundreds of thousands of people, and Louis, who was still very young, was standing in the middle of all of it. For a while he was perfectly fine, and then, as these things sometimes do, it became too much. The noise, the crowds, the endless cameras, the sheer overwhelming size of it all. A small child can only hold so much before the world becomes a little too big. And in the moment that Louis began to be overwhelmed, before a single onlooker had even noticed, his father noticed. And then William did the smallest, gentlest thing, the kind of thing no ceremony had ever planned for. He quietly looked after his son. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to like this video and subscribe, so you do not miss a single update. It was not a dramatic thing, and that was exactly why it mattered. William did not make a show of it. He simply noticed, the way an attentive parent always notices, that his little boy had reached the edge of what he could manage. A state occasion, in plain words, is a grand official event steeped in ceremony where the whole world is watching and every member of the family is expected to stand still and composed for hours at a time. It is a lot to ask of anyone. It is a great deal to ask of a very young child, and rather than expect his son to simply endure it, William quietly stepped in to help him carry it. He did the small things a good father does without thinking. He drew Louis a little closer. He lowered his head to the boy's level and said something soft that no one else could hear. He put a steady, reassuring hand where a small child needs to feel one, and he angled himself just slightly so that his own body came between his son and the worst of the crowd's attention. None of it was planned. None of it was for show. It was simply a father reading his child and giving him exactly what he needed in the middle of an occasion designed to demand the opposite. Those small movements carried more meaning than any words could have. A protective gesture, in plain words, is a small physical act. A hand on the shoulder, a body turned to shield, a head bent close, that tells a child without speaking that they are safe and not alone. Children read these signals long before they understand language, and they trust them completely. Louis did not need his father to explain anything. He only needed to feel the hand and the closeness and the steady calm of a parent who had everything under control. And in the middle of all that overwhelming noise, that quiet, wordless reassurance was worth more to a small boy than the grandest ceremony in the world. The reaction to that small moment rippled outward slowly, because at first only those very close by even saw it. Louis felt his father draw near and began visibly to settle. William kept his attention gently on his son, unbothered by the grandeur around them. Catherine, standing close, saw what her husband was doing and quietly made room for it. And a nearby onlooker, watching the whole thing unfold, felt something catch in their throat because it was such an ordinary act of love in such an extraordinary place, because that was the heart of it. In the middle of one of the most formal, most watched, most rigidly choreographed events in the world, a father had quietly decided that his child's comfort mattered more than the performance. He had not shushed the boy, or scolded him, or stiffly ignored his distress the way an older, colder tradition might have demanded. He had simply looked after him, warmly and without embarrassment, in full view of the world. And though hardly anyone noticed in the moment, the cameras had caught it. And by that evening, it was all anyone could talk about. To understand why one small gentle gesture struck such a deep chord, you have to understand what royal children have always been expected to endure. For generations, royal children were treated, at grand occasions, almost as small adults. According to a documented household account later shared with senior aides, the old expectation was rigid and unforgiving. Children of the family were to be seen, composed, and silent, standing through long ceremonies without fidgeting, without complaint, without any visible sign of the boredom or fear or overwhelm that any normal child would feel. The spotlight, in plain words, is the intense public attention that follows the royal family everywhere, and children were placed under it early and expected to bear it as gracefully as their parents. It was, by any modern measure, a great deal to demand of someone so small. The pressure on royal children has, if anything, only grown harder in the modern age. Today there are not only the crowds and the formality, but the cameras, thousands of them, and the endless online commentary that follows. Going viral, in plain words, is when an image or moment spreads across the internet so quickly that almost everyone sees it at once, and royal children now live with the knowledge that any expression, any yawn, any small childish moment might be captured and shared with the entire world within minutes. It is an extraordinary weight to place on young shoulders. And some people, watching these occasions, still expect those young shoulders to bear it without a flicker. William understood that weight better than almost anyone alive, because he had grown up beneath it himself. According to a private palace briefing, the prince had spent his own childhood in the glare of that same relentless attention, and he had never forgotten what it felt like. He remembered being small at grand occasions. He remembered the noise and the cameras and the strange pressure to perform. And he remembered most of all what the machine of royal life could do to the people caught inside it, having watched as a boy the toll it took on his own mother. That memory shaped everything about the way he chose to raise his own children. What the old traditions had always demanded of royal children was composure, and composure is a heavy thing to ask of the very young. Composure, in plain words, is the calm, controlled way of holding yourself no matter what you are feeling inside, and it takes most people many years to learn it, if they ever fully do. To expect it from a small child, in the middle of a deafening, overwhelming occasion, was to ask for something almost impossible, and to treat the child's failure to manage it as a fault. William looked at that expectation and saw it clearly for what it was. Not a reasonable standard, but an unfair one, laid on shoulders far too small to carry it. Against that old expectation, William set a newer and gentler idea, the idea of a parent's duty of care. Duty of care, in plain words, is the responsibility to look after the well-being and safety of someone in your charge. And to William, that duty came before every ceremony and every tradition there was. He did not believe his children owed the crown of flawless performance. He believed he owed his children a childhood and a sense of safety, and a father who would always put their small hearts first. Where the old world saw a royal child as a little symbol to be displayed, William saw a son to be protected, and he had decided long ago which of those two views he would live by. So William had made a quiet decision, long before that day, about the kind of father he intended to be. According to a recorded conversation kept by a senior aide, he had resolved that his children would be protected from the harshest edges of royal life for as long as possible, and that their well-being would always come before the performance. He wanted them to know the grand occasions as something they could grow into slowly, not something they were thrown into and expected to survive. He wanted them to feel safe inside the spectacle, held by a parent, rather than exposed and alone within it. And he had decided that if the old expectations and the tender needs of a small child ever came into conflict, the child would win, every single time. The people closest to William understood this about him and admired it. Catherine shared the conviction completely and lived by it as fully as he did. The children's carers saw a father who was present and attentive in a way royal fathers had not always been. The older, more traditional members of the household sometimes found it a little modern for their taste. And the children themselves, though far too young to understand any of it, simply knew that their parents made them feel safe, which is the only thing a small child ever really needs to know. That decision was tested gently at the very occasion where the protective moment took place, because not everyone approved of a royal child showing that he was overwhelmed, and not everyone approved of a father breaking from the stiff choreography to comfort him. According to an internal note later circulated among private secretaries, there were quiet voices in the household and beyond it who felt the whole thing had been a little too casual, a little too human for such a solemn and important occasion. To them, a royal child at a great ceremony should be composed, and if he was not, he should be quietly made to be. Some of those voices found their way into the commentary that followed. A handful of critics, watching the same footage that had moved so many others, saw not a tender moment, but a lapse in discipline. The child should have been kept in line. One such voice sniffed, echoing an older and colder idea of what royal children were for. To them, the boy's overwhelm was an embarrassment, and the father's gentle response an indulgence. They believed a future member of the monarchy should be taught, early and firmly, to hide what he felt and perform what was expected, no matter how young he was or how much was being asked. Their complaint rested on an old idea of what a royal engagement is meant to be. A royal engagement, in plain words, is an official public duty carried out on behalf of the crown, and for the critics, appearing at a grand occasion was exactly that, a duty, even for a child, to be performed correctly regardless of feeling. In their eyes, the small boy had been on duty and had failed to perform, and his father had failed to correct him. It was a coldly consistent view, and it was also, to most people watching, a rather sad one because it treated a young child at a family occasion as though he were a soldier on parade rather than a little boy who had simply had enough. But here the story asks us to be fair even to those critics, because their view was not born of cruelty. It came from an old and genuine belief that the dignity of the crown depends on composure, and that royal children must be prepared, early, for a life of relentless scrutiny. They were not wrong that the life ahead would be hard. They were only wrong about the cure. They believed a child was best prepared for pressure by being exposed to it without mercy. William believed the opposite, that a child is best prepared for a hard life by first being given a safe and loving one, and that a boy who is protected and reassured when he is small grows into an adult far stronger than one who was simply left to cope. And so, when the criticism reached him, William did not argue with it in the language of protocol or tradition. He answered it, quietly, with the simplest truth there is. According to those close to the family, when it was gently suggested to him that perhaps his son should have been kept more composed, more controlled, more suitably princely, William did not hesitate for a moment before he replied. "He is a little boy first," William said, "and a prince second." The words settled the matter completely, because there was nothing to say against them. They were not a defense of bad behavior, because a small child overwhelmed by an enormous occasion has done nothing wrong at all. They were a statement of priorities, plain and unshakable. Before Louis was a prince, before he was a future part of the monarchy, before he was a small figure in a grand national spectacle, he was a child, William's child, and his father's first duty was not to the ceremony, but to him. The critics had spoken of dignity and discipline. William had answered with something far higher, the simple, fierce, ordinary love of a parent for his son. The reaction to that quiet stand rippled through everyone who heard it. William held firm to his priorities without a trace of doubt. Catherine stood with her husband completely, because it was exactly how the two of them had always chosen to parent. Anne, blunt as ever, remarked that the boy had done nothing but be a child, and that anyone who expected otherwise had forgotten what children were. And the critics, faced with a father's calm and unanswerable love, found that their objections suddenly sounded rather small. And here the story turns, the way these stories do, away from any bitterness. Because William, having been quietly criticized for the tenderest of acts, did not lash out at the people who had misjudged him. He did not name them, or answer them publicly, or demand that anyone apologize for questioning how he cared for his own son. He simply carried on being the father he had decided to be, protecting his children, comforting them when they needed it, and letting his conduct speak for itself. He had no interest in winning an argument. He was interested only in raising his children well, and he trusted that the rightness of that would be clear to anyone who cared to see it. According to those close to the family, William was not even especially troubled by the criticism, because he had made his peace with that particular question long ago. He knew that some people would always prefer the old, stiff way, and he did not need their approval to keep faith with his own children. What mattered to him was not how the moment looked to a handful of traditionalists, but how it had felt to a small boy who needed his father. On that measure, there was nothing to second-guess. Louis had been overwhelmed, and then he had been comforted, and then he had been all right again. To William, that was the entire story, and it was a story that had ended exactly as it should. The way he handled it all quietly impressed those around him. William absorbed the criticism without a flicker of defensiveness. Catherine watched her husband refuse to be drawn into a fight and loved him the more for it. The household, which had half expected some response to the critics, saw that none was coming and understood why. And the children, shielded entirely from the whole grown-up argument, went on simply being children, which was, after all, the entire point. By then, though, the small moment had reached the wider world, and the world had fallen for it completely. The footage of William quietly comforting his overwhelmed son spread everywhere, and the reaction was not division but a great warm wave of affection. People were not talking about a lapse in royal discipline. They were talking about a dad, a father who had noticed his little boy struggling in the middle of all that noise, and had gently, unshowily, made him feel safe. In an age when the family was so often discussed in terms of duty and image and controversy, here was a moment of pure, ordinary humanity, and the country embraced it wholeheartedly. A major newspaper caught the mood under a warm and simple headline. "A Father First," it read. A newspaper front page, in plain words, is the first thing millions of people see before they read a single word beneath it, and this one turned a small, tender gesture into a story about the kind of parent and the kind of future king William was showing himself to be. He was not shown as a royal breaking protocol. He was shown as a father putting his child first, exactly as any loving parent would. A broadcaster summed up the whole moment in a single line that spread as quickly as the footage itself. "That is not a prince," the broadcaster said. "That is a dad." That sentence captured precisely why the moment had landed so hard. People had grown used to seeing the family perform its role, to seeing the grandeur and the ceremony and the careful composure, and then, for just a moment, all of that had fallen away, and underneath it was something everyone recognized, a parent looking after his child. The crown had not made William less of a father, and in that small, protective moment, the whole country saw it. The way the country responded said something about the times as much as about William. The mood of the country, in plain words, is the general feeling of the public at a given moment, and just then that mood was tired of spectacle and hungry for something real. People had seen enough grandeur and enough carefully managed images. What they longed for was sincerity, a glimpse of the human beings beneath the titles, and in one unguarded, tender gesture, William had given it to them. He had shown them a father, plainly and without performance, and the country, starved for exactly that kind of honesty, took him straight to its heart. The public sentiment settled into a deep and genuine warmth. Parents everywhere recognized the moment in their bones, because every parent has stood somewhere loud and overwhelming with a small child who had reached their limit, and every good parent has done exactly what William did, drawn the child close and made the world feel smaller and safer. People did not admire William that day because he was a prince. They admired him because he was a good dad, and because he had let the whole world see it without a trace of embarrassment. In protecting his son, he had shown the country something more reassuring about the future of the monarchy than any grand ceremony ever could. The next generation, people realized, was being raised with love. There was, too, a quiet significance in what the moment said about the monarchy to come. For centuries, royal children had been raised to hide their feelings and perform their roles. William was raising his differently, and he was doing it openly, in front of everyone. He was showing that a future king could be gentle, that strength and tenderness were not opposites, and that the crown could hold a father who put his child's small, overwhelmed heart above the demands of a grand occasion. It was a small revolution, carried out not with a speech or a policy but with a hand on a little boy's shoulder at exactly the right moment. According to an internal note later circulated among private secretaries, the household itself came to see the moment as a quiet asset rather than an embarrassment. The press pack, in plain words, is the group of photographers and reporters who follow the family and shape how the public sees them, and for once, the images they captured needed no managing at all. There was no spin required, no careful statement, no damage to limit. The picture told its own story, and the story was a good one. The advisors, who might once have fretted over a child's overwhelm at a formal event, found to their surprise that the country had fallen in love with exactly the moment the old rules would have tried to prevent. Sometimes they were learning the most powerful thing the family could do was simply to be human and to let the world see it. When the noise settled, the moment remained, cherished rather than debated. The critics who had wanted the child kept in line faded quietly from the conversation, their old ideas looking colder and smaller with every retelling of the story. What people remembered was not a lapse in discipline but an act of love, and what they took from it was reassurance that the children at the heart of the family's future were safe, protected, and deeply loved. William never spoke of it again. He did not need to. The moment had said everything, and it had said it without a single word of explanation. That was the truth the whole thing was built on. Real strength in a parent is not the ability to make a child perform. It is the ability to notice when a child is struggling and to set everything else aside, even the eyes of the whole world, in order to help. The grandest occasion in the country had demanded composure and spectacle, and a father had quietly answered it with tenderness, and in doing so had shown a kind of strength far greater than any ceremony could stage. William understood that his son's small, overwhelmed heart mattered more, in that moment, than any tradition or expectation. Louis learned, though he was far too young to know it, that he was safe. And the country learned that the future of the crown was in the hands of a man who knew exactly what mattered most. There is a lesson in it that belongs to every parent, crown or no crown. The world will always try to tell you what your child should be, how they should behave, how they should perform for the watching eyes around them. And there will always be a quiet pressure to put that performance first, to worry more about how things look than about how your child actually feels. William's small gesture was a reminder that the pressure is almost always wrong. A child who is struggling does not need to be corrected, they need to be comforted. And a parent who can tell the difference and who has the courage to choose comfort even when the whole world is watching is giving their child the greatest gift there is, the simple, unshakable knowledge that they are loved exactly as they are. It also carried a quiet hope for what the monarchy might become. For so long the family had been shaped by an idea that duty meant hiding what you felt, that strength meant never showing weakness, that the crown demanded a certain coldness of everyone who wore it or waited to. William was gently proving that none of that had to be true. He was showing that a future king could be warm, that he could kneel to a frightened child in front of the whole world and be stronger for it, not weaker, and that the crown of the future might be a kinder and more human thing than the crown of the past. That, in the end, was the real reason the moment mattered so much. It was not only a glimpse of a good father, it was a glimpse of a better future. William's protective moment with Prince Louis had royal fans talking for a reason far deeper than a sweet image on a grand day. It struck a chord because it was real, and because it was recognizable, and because it showed, in one small gesture, the kind of father and the kind of future king that William had quietly chosen to be. He did not shield his son to make a point or to win praise or to answer his critics. He shielded his son because his son needed shielding, and because to William there was never any question that a little boy's heart came first. In the middle of all that noise and grandeur, a father simply looked after his child. And a whole country, watching, was reminded of the most reassuring truth of all, that beneath the crown and the ceremony, the next generation is being raised with love. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please do not forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.